always seemed to be raining on a Saturday morning in the 1980s or 90s. Not a dramatic storm, but that persistent grey British drizzle that blurred the shop fronts of the high street into a watercolour of neon and brick. You stood there, the collar of your thrashed coat turned up against the damp chill, with one hand shoved deep into your pocket. Inside, your fingers wrapped around a cold metallic treasure, a single 50-pence piece, or if it had been a particularly good week, a shiny £1 coin. It was your pocket money, a passport to a universe of absolute freedom. If you walk down that same high street today, the landscape is entirely predictable. It is a monotonous stretch of generic coffee chains, vaping outlets, and betting shops. But back then, the British High Street was a sensory battleground. It was a living, breathing theatre of unique tastes, comforting aromas, and weekend rituals that defined a generation. We all remember the sweet comfort of those legendary flavours. We remember the places that felt like safety, the smells that signalled the weekend had truly arrived.
But beneath the sugar-coated memories lies a much more chaotic reality, because some of the retro foods we begged our parents for didn't just fade away with changing trends. They vanished amid bizarre media panics, massive health crises, and jaw-dropping political scandals that shook the nation to its very core. For generations of British children, the undisputed cathedral of the Saturday morning pilgrimage was Woolworths. You didn't just visit Woolies, you entered a sanctuary, and right at the heart of it stood the ultimate test of childhood strategy, the pick-and-mix aisle. The ritual always began the same way. You approached the massive plastic bins, your eyes darting over rows of jelly-fried eggs, pink mice, and glossy cola bottles. You reached for those iconic silver-coloured metal tongs. They were always slightly loose at the rivet, sticky to the touch, and surprisingly awkward to maneuver as you tried to grip a single elusive gummy bear. This wasn't just about picking sweets, it was a high-stakes mathematical game. Every child knew the unspoken rule of the paper bag. If you made the amateur mistake of filling the bottom with heavy, dense fudge or solid chocolate jazzies, your budget was blown before you even reached the halfway mark. The true masters of the craft lined the base with a tactical layer of pink and white marshmallows, building a soft, voluminous foundation before carefully dropping the heavier prize pieces on top. And then came the walk of judgment to the scales. Your heart raced slightly as the formidable lady behind the counter took your crinkling bag. You watched her expression, praying you hadn't miscalculated, terrified of the ultimate public humiliation, having to awkwardly ask her to take 2 cola bottles out of the bag because you were 5 pence short. But it wasn't just the sweets that stayed with us, it was the atmosphere. Woolworths had a distinct, unrepeatable aroma. It was a potent, heady mixture of sugary confectionery, artificial strawberry, cheap wooden floor polish, and the faint plastic smell of vinyl records drifting over from the chart music section next door. It was the scent of a British weekend, captured entirely in a single room. Long before the golden McDonald's arrived to turn fast food into a paper-wrapped assembly line, the pinnacle of weekend dining on the British High Street belonged to Wimpy. For a child growing up in the 70s or 80s, stepping into a Wimpy felt like entering a proper, sophisticated restaurant. The entire experience was beautifully inverted compared to modern fast food. You didn't stand in a frantic, claustrophobic queue at a plastic counter while a worker shouted out order numbers over a screeching fryer. Instead, you walked through the door and were greeted by a waiter or waitress in a crisp uniform who ushered your family to a proper booth. They would hand you a glossy, heavy, laminated menu, giving you all the time in the world to make your choice. There was a distinct tactile weight to everything inside a Wimpy. You can probably still feel the chilling cold of the actual ceramic plate as it was set down in front of you. There was the sharp clink of real metal knives and forks hitting the table, and the sheer satisfying heft of a thick, heavy glass containing a milkshake or a Knickerbocker glory, a glass so substantial it required a child to use 2 hands just to lift it. But the absolute undisputed star of the Wimpy menu was an item that sounds almost mythical today: the bender in a bun. It was a bright red Frankfurter sausage, intentionally sliced with deep, precise slits along its outer edge. As it hit the hot, flat-top grill, those slits allowed the sausage to curl into a perfect, uniform circle, making it fit flawlessly inside a soft, toasted white burger bun. Complemented by a smear of relish and a slice of processed cheese, it was a masterpiece of retro British culinary engineering. To a kid in the 1980s, eating a circular hot dog with a knife and fork wasn't just a meal, it was the definition of absolute high society, a weekend luxury that made the rainy high street outside completely melt away. When the calendar flipped to November, the British high street transformed. The pleasant afternoon walks were replaced by a bitter, bone-chilling cold and a thick, damp fog that seemed to roll off the North Sea and settle permanently between the brick walls of the town centre. The only escape from the biting wind was a beacon of warmth that became a staple of the late 20th century high street, Spudulike. Before the nation became obsessed with paninis and artisan wraps, the height of lunchtime comfort was a humble giant jacket potato. Walking into a Spudulike on a freezing afternoon was a sensory revelation. The windows were always heavily fogged up from the sheer amount of steam trapped inside, instantly blurring the cold world outside. The preparation was a masterclass in simple theatricality. You watched the worker reach into a massive drawer-like oven and pull out a potato the size of a rugby ball, tightly wrapped in silver crinkling tinfoil. With one swift, practiced motion of a large knife, they sliced the foil open. A massive cloud of hot, earthy steam burst into the air, carrying the rich aroma of slow-baked skin. The contrast of textures was absolute perfection. The outer skin was thick, charred, and beautifully bitter, while the interior was a mountain of incredibly fluffy, piping hot white potato that collapsed at the slightest touch. Then came the glorious, messy chaos of the toppings. First went the heavy dollop of salted butter, immediately melting into a golden pool that disappeared into the steaming depths. Then came the deluge, a mountain of grated cheddar cheese that slowly turned into a gooey blanket, or a tidal wave of hot baked beans, or the ultimate 80s indulgence, the creamy, curry-infused coronation chicken. You walked out holding that thick white polystyrene container, the heat radiated directly through the foam, warming your frozen hands through your woolen gloves. Eating it with a flimsy plastic fork that frequently snapped under the weight of the cheese wasn't just lunch, it was a survival strategy against the British winter, a steaming shield of pure comfort. But you didn't always have the budget for a sit-down meal or a giant jacket potato. Sometimes your Saturday adventure was defined by a frantic dash into the local newsagent or corner shop on the high street, where the shelves were lined with bright artificial colours designed to tempt any kid with a few pennies to spare. And in the 70s and 80s, 2 names ruled the counter with a mixture of immense popularity and sheer sensory eccentricity: Spangles and Cresta Pop. Spangles were an absolute staple of British childhood. They weren't glamorous, they were individual square blocks of hard-boiled sugar with a distinct dimple in the centre, packed tightly into a tube of rough, waxy paper. The flavours were a lottery, everything from Old English to tangerine, but it was the physical reality of them that stuck in the memory. If you made the fatal mistake of leaving an unfinished roll of Spangles in your school trouser pocket on a rare hot summer afternoon, disaster struck. The sugar would slowly dissolve and fuse with the fabric. By the time you remembered them, you'd find a sticky, gelatinous mess, and you'd literally have to peel the waxy paper and bits of pocket lint off the sweet just to get a taste of that molten, synthetic fruit flavour. And if you needed something to wash that down, you looked in the glass display fridge for a bottle featuring a cool, sunglasses-wearing polar bear and the legendary catchphrase, "It's frothy, man." This was Cresta Pop. Cresta wasn't just an ordinary fizzy drink, it was an assault on the senses. The most famous variety was a terrifyingly bright, almost radioactive green liquid that claimed to be strawberry-flavoured, though it tasted entirely like pure, unadulterated chemistry. But the real magic was the texture. The moment you popped the metal cap and took a swig, the liquid didn't just fizz, it erupted. It generated a thick, dense, soapy foam that coated your tongue and left a massive green moustache of frothy bubbles across your lips on the very first sip. It was weird, it was wonderfully synthetic, and for a few pennies, it was the ultimate taste of high street independence. As the 1990s drew to a close, the sensory battleground of the high street shifted from the traditional corner newsagent to the glowing chiller cabinets of the new modern supermarkets. And around 1998, a massive American juggernaut landed on British shores, promising to bring a thick, vibrant splash of California sunshine to the perpetually grey British climate. This was Sunny Delight, or as every kid frantically called it, Sunny D. The marketing campaign was an absolute masterclass in psychological manipulation. It wasn't placed in the ordinary soft drink aisle next to the fizzy sodas. Instead, it was strategically positioned in the refrigerated section, right next to the fresh milk and pure fruit juices. Dressed in a solid white plastic bottle with a blindingly bright sun-soaked label, parents were subtly led to believe this was a wholesome, vitamin-packed, healthy choice for their children. In reality, it was a nutritional illusion. It was an incredibly thick, heavy, intensely sweet liquid that contained roughly 5% actual fruit juice, with the rest of the bottle packed to the brim with water, vegetable oil, thickeners, and a mountain of sugar. But to a child, it was liquid gold. It had a smooth, unnaturally rich texture that coated the throat and a massive hit of synthetic citrus flavour that made ordinary orange squash taste like tap water. Within a year of its launch, Sunny Delight became a cultural phenomenon, racking up hundreds of millions of pounds in sales and briefly overtaking Coca-Cola as the nation's favourite drink. But in 1999, the sunshine dream abruptly collided with a bizarre and terrifying medical reality that became one of the greatest scandals in British retail history. Reports began to surface of a 4-year-old girl from Wales who had developed a striking, unnatural physical transformation. Her face, her hands, and her skin had turned a bright, distinct shade of canary yellow and orange. The culprit wasn't a rare tropical disease, it was the fact that she had been consuming massive quantities of Sunny Delight every single day. The drink was heavily fortified with beta-carotene, the natural pigment found in carrots used to give the liquid its signature radioactive orange glow. The young girl's body simply couldn't process the sheer volume of pigment, causing it to seep directly into her skin. Almost overnight, the media went into an absolute frenzy. Sensationalist front-page headlines warned parents that the high street's favourite new drink was literally dying their children from the inside out. The pristine, health-conscious image of the brand was utterly shattered. Parental panic swept the nation, and bottles of Sunny D were pulled from kitchen fridges across the UK. Sales plummeted catastrophically, turning a multi-million-pound empire into a cautionary tale of marketing hubris and leaving a generation of kids wondering if their favourite drink was secretly a toxic biohazard. While the Sunny D crisis was unfolding in the chiller cabinets, another culinary phenomenon was quietly dominating the frozen food aisles of high street giants like Iceland and Belgium. If you were a British child in the 90s or early 2000s, there was one specific, bizarrely shaped item in the freezer that represented the absolute holy grail of weekday teas and school lunches, but Turkey Twizzler. Manufactured by Bernard Matthews, these were not ordinary meat products. They were long, coiled, corkscrew-shaped spirals of processed turkey meat, heavily coated in a sticky, savory glaze. The physical experience of cooking them is etched into the minds of millions. As they baked in the oven, an incredible amount of translucent orange-tinted grease would pool on the baking tray, sizzling violently. But to a kid, the texture was unmatched. The outer edges of the spiral would turn beautifully dark and crispy, while the inside remained soft and intensely savory. You didn't just eat a turkey Twizzler, you unraveled it, playing with its spring-like shape before devouring it with a side of smiley faces and baked beans. It was cheap, it was deeply satisfying, and it was a staple of working-class British life. But in 2005, the spiral paradise came crashing down. The catalyst was a young, passionate television chef named Jamie Oliver, who launched a high-profile crusade called Jamie's School Dinners to tackle the abysmal nutritional quality of British school meals. And he found his ultimate villain in the turkey Twizzler. In a scene that became iconic in British television history, Oliver stood in front of a room of horrified parents and school cooks, holding up a raw, unappealing Twizzler. He didn't just criticize it, he bok-chun its entire anatomy. He revealed that the product contained just a tiny fraction of actual turkey meat, with the rest of the spiral composed of water, pork fat, mechanically reclaimed meat scraps, skin, and a cocktail of artificial thickeners and flavor enhancers. He famously demonstrated how much pure fat could be squeezed out of a single serving.
The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Under intense media scrutiny and parental pressure, school boards across the country banned turkey Twizzlers almost overnight. Sensing the shifting cultural tide, supermarkets pulled them from the high street shelves. But the ban triggered an incredibly bizarre counter-rebellion. A segment of the British public was furious that their favourite comforting junk food was being snatched away by a wealthy celebrity chef. In a wave of defiance that captured the national headlines, rebel mums in Yorkshire were caught on camera ordering fast food and contraband turkey Twizzlers from local shops, delivering them through the school iron railings to their children at lunchtime. It was a spectacular, uniquely British culture war fought over a piece of spiraled processed meat, a food that went from a high street favourite to a forbidden underground contraband item. Yet long before celebrity chefs or orange-skinned children dominated the headlines, the British high street faced an altogether darker, more existential crisis. It was a crisis that didn't just change what we ate for lunch, it injected a cold, paralyzing dose of fear into the very heart of British society. This was the summer of 1990, the peak of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, forever known to a haunted generation as mad cow disease.
Until that moment, the humble beef burger was an untouchable staple of the high street weekend. Whether it was a quick bite at Wimpy, a greasy quarter-pounder from a local independent trailer, or a package of mince bought from the trusted family butcher on the corner, beef was the literal backbone of the British diet. But almost overnight, the atmosphere on the high street shifted from comforting familiarity to deep, unspoken suspicion. Headlines began to suggest that a fatal brain-wasting disease in cattle. Until that moment, the humble beef burger was an untouchable staple of the high street weekend. Whether it was a quick bite at Wimpy, a greasy quarter-pounder from a local independent trailer, or a package of mince bought from the trusted family butcher on the corner, beef was the literal backbone of the British diet. But almost overnight, the atmosphere on the high street shifted from comforting familiarity to deep, unspoken suspicion. Headlines began to suggest that a fatal brain-wasting disease in cattle could potentially cross over to humans through the meat on our plates. You could see the hesitation in real time. People would stand outside the local butcher's shop staring at the raw meat displays through the glass before quietly walking away. Chains like Wimpy frantically hung up signs declaring they were switching entirely to imported beef, desperate to distance themselves from the domestic supply. The government was facing a catastrophic collapse of the British agricultural industry, and panic was reaching a boiling point. They needed a massive, definitive public relations stunt to restore national confidence. And what happened next became one of the most bizarre and heavily criticized moments in British political and media history. In May 1990, the Minister of Agriculture, John Gummer, stepped out in front of a wall of flashing press cameras at a boat show in Suffolk. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood his 4-year-old daughter, Cordelia.
In a desperate bid to prove to millions of anxious parents that British beef was completely safe, Gummer held a large, greasy beef burger in his hand. With the cameras rolling, he repeatedly tried to coax his young daughter to take a bite for the nation. The footage is agonizingly uncomfortable to watch today. Cordelia looked visibly reluctant, her tiny hands pushing the heavy bun away, while her father smiled tightly for the press, eventually taking a massive bite himself to show there was absolutely nothing to fear. The stunt backfired catastrophically. Instead of soothing the public, the image of a government deflection and hubris outraged the country. It became a symbol of government deflection and hubris. For years afterward, every trip to a high street burger bar carried a faint, eerie shadow of doubt. It was the moment the innocent, unthinking joy of retro British street food was permanently lost, replaced by a modern world of tracking, testing, and a deep-seated skepticism of what exactly was being hidden inside our favorite comforting meals. In the end, our obsession with these lost flavors of the British high street isn't just about the sugar, the grease, or the eccentric marketing. It is about what those foods represented. They were the anchors of a simpler, more connected era.
To look back at the retro high street is to remember a time before smartphones and algorithms partitioned our attention. A time when a Saturday morning was a physical, shared adventure with your family or friends. A time when a single coin in your pocket held the promise of genuine wonder, and the rainy pavement outside felt like a stage for childhood independence. The corporate chains and sterile betting shops that occupy those storefronts today can give us convenience, but they can never replicate the soul of the places we lost. They can never recreate the sticky metal tongs of Woolworths, the heavy ceramic plates of Wimpy, or the chaotic, rebellious joy of an oven-baked turkey Twizzler. Those flavours belong to a specific chapter of British life, one that was sweet, sometimes scandalous, but entirely our own. If you could climb into a time machine right now and bring back just one single flavour from the retro British high street for an afternoon, what would it be? Would you choose a paper bag packed with a perfectly calculated weight of Woolworths Pick and Mix, a steaming butter-drenched jacket potato from Spudger-like, or a legendary bender in a bun from a smoke-filled Wimpy booth? Let me know your memories in the comments below.